I wrote a book called Freedom's Teacher, The Life of Septima Clark, which is a biography of Septima Clark, who was a lifelong educator, social activist, and civil rights activist. And my book is about her educational activism, both prior to and during and after the civil rights movement. So I was interested in telling her story because she was a very important person in the civil rights movement, but she was also important before that. She was nearly 60 years old by the time she did what she's most well known for, which is the Citizenship education program, Citizenship schools. So as I got into researching this book, I was like, well, what did she do from 20 to 60? What did she do that prepared her to do this? And what does this tell us about the deeper roots of the movement and women's roles in it? And then her schools were primary sites of women's activism during the movement too. So looking at this one figure was a way to tell a longer story about the civil rights movement, but also about Black women's activism across the 20th century. So Septima Clark was born in Charleston in 1898. Her father was a slave, and her mother was a free woman who had been raised in Haiti part of the time, but also born in Charleston. She started her teaching career in 1916 in a rural school on Johns Island, which is a sea island off the coast of Charleston. She continued her career in urban schools in South Carolina, spent most of her teaching career, all of her teaching career in South Carolina. And then in 1956, the state of South Carolina passed a law forbidding state employees from belonging to subversive organizations such as the NAACP. And she lost her job and her retirement. And then she developed a citizenship education program to be used during the civil rights movement. So the citizenship schools were designed to enable African Americans in the South to learn to read and write so that they could pass the literacy test required by southern states to register to vote. But beyond that, so they had a practical literacy component, but beyond that, Clark's curriculum taught people about political literacy and economic literacy. So for her, the focus, the first hurdle was registering to vote, but the real job was coming to understand citizenship responsibilities and then using the vote to bring improvement to your local community. The ostensible first goal of the schools was to pass the literacy test and register to vote. Each southern state had a different literacy test that usually required applicants to read and interpret a section of the state constitution to the satisfaction of the registrar. The registrar was always a white person who could find anything to say, well, that wasn't good enough, right? But you also had to sign your name on the form. So that was the first step, and it was a concrete goal. And once people were able to do that, they could imagine doing other things as well. It's like this practical literacy gave people the self-confidence that they had otherwise lacked because they had been dependent on other people because they couldn't read for themselves. So how the citizenship schools worked, Highlander oversaw them from 1957 until 1961, at which point it transferred the program to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which is Dr. King's organization. And from there, the program spread throughout the South. How they did this was they had community organizers identifying people who would most likely make good teachers in their community. And they looked for people with PhD minds who had never had a chance to get an education. So it was very grassroots. And they would bring people to a week-long workshop where they would teach them how to teach the classes, how to recruit students, how to gauge people's educational levels, and then how to identify what needed doing in the community and then start to work on that problem. Another part of the genius of the citizenship schools, is that few moderate white Southerners could argue against teaching semi-literate African Americans to read and write. So segregation actually at times provides a camouflage, right? White people don't know what's going on in that classroom. It's only once people who pass through those schools put what they learned into practice that white people start to figure out these schools are a source of the problem. So the genius of it is that segregation provides cover. Well, the schools are funded by private foundations, and teachers receive a small stipend for teaching. They meet 2 nights a week and usually run for 5 or 6 weeks, and then everybody goes to attempt to register. But in the course of that, they're also learning math. They're learning how to pay their taxes. They're learning how to read a tax bill, right? If they own property, so they won't lose it for not paying their taxes, right? So they're learning all these other skills that can be applied beyond going to vote. And that's the significance. And Septima Clark throughout her life was also part of a network of Black women activists in the South. So people that she knew were people like Ella Baker, who was instrumental in the founding of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. She met Rosa Parks in the summer of 1955 when Parks attended the Highlander Folk School, where Clark developed the citizenship schools initially. 4 months after Parks left Highlander is the day she refuses to move from her seat on the bus, right? So there's a lot of behind-the-scenes organizing and educational efforts going on in the movement before things emerge into public view. And Clark was a big kind of behind-the-scenes person, preparing people to take action through her education program. As far as things that people don't know, I don't think that many people know of her at all and her role in the movement. I mean, Clark first took political action in 1919. After World War I, she joined the Charleston NAACP to force Charleston to hire Black teachers in their Black schools, public schools, because they only had white teachers at this point. And so she joined early, and she kept not an unbroken chain, say, but she had that experience, and through that experience she kind of set the pattern that she would follow throughout her life, which was to advocate on behalf of Black women and their professional options, but also on behalf of Black children. So she was concerned throughout her life and her activism with things like health care, employment, political participation. And of course this ebbs and flows over the course of her life, but it's always there. You know, one thing I think that's really important that Septima Clark recognized is, she said one time, it's like the pebble thrown in the mill pond. One thing spreading out starts others. And I think that was like a lifelong approach for her, and certainly it shows her wisdom, and I think that that's also something she would say to us today.